The truth is, when I launched my business, my parents told me they couldn't help me at all. Not a single penny. But when my sister came up with her own idea, they handed her everything she wanted on a silver platter. They thought she was destined for success and I was bound to fail. But what happened next proved them all wrong in the most painful way possible. Before we dive into this story, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you never miss a tale of justice. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments. Okay, let's get into it. I remember the exact moment it all began. It was a gray morning, the kind where the sky feels heavy and undecided, almost mirroring the weight I carried inside me. I sat at the kitchen table with a folder neatly organized in front of me. Inside that folder were pages I had poured months into, my business plan. To me, it wasn't just a stack of documents. It was the blueprint of my dream, the proof that I had thought everything through down to the smallest detail. I had always been the careful one in the family, the one who made lists, who budgeted, who planned. My sister, on the other hand, lived in a whirlwind. She leapt from one idea to the next as though life were a carousel, spinning too fast for her to hold on. Yet somehow, she was always the golden child, always the one my parents celebrated, defended, and, more often than not, rescued from the messes she created. But on that morning, I tried to set all of that aside. I wanted to believe this would be different, that if they saw how hard I had worked, how practical and realistic my vision was, they would finally support me in the same way they had always supported her. I just need a little help to get it off the ground, I said, my voice steady though my palms were damp with nervous sweat. I pushed the folder across the table to my parents. I've already saved as much as I can. I'm not asking for a handout, just a small investment. I can pay it back with interest. My father flipped through the first few pages, not really reading, just scanning the way someone looks at a menu when they've already decided what they'll order. My mother sat back with her arms crossed, her eyes darting toward the clock on the wall. Finally, my father closed the folder and slid it back across the table as though it were too heavy to hold. It's not that we don't believe in you, he said, his tone carrying the unmistakable weight of dismissal. It's just, we don't think this is the right time. Businesses are risky. We can't afford to just throw money away. My mother nodded, as though they had rehearsed the response. We've worked too hard to gamble our savings. You'll have to find another way. The words stung more than I expected. I had braced myself for questions, maybe skepticism, but the outright refusal, without even giving my idea a fair chance, felt like a door slammed in my face. I sat there, my throat tight, forcing myself to nod politely. Inside, though, a storm brewed. I thought about all the years I had watched them bail my sister out of one disaster after another. The credit card debt she racked up in college, the car she wrecked and never paid to fix, the countless jobs she walked away from because she wasn't feeling it. Every time, they had swooped in, their wallets open, their excuses ready, and yet here I was, with a plan that was solid, realistic, and built on my own savings and hard work. I wasn't asking for everything, just enough to bridge the gap. But to them, that was too risky. I swallowed the bitterness that rose in my throat, telling myself I could handle this. I had been independent before. I could be independent again. Still, as I gathered my papers and tucked them back into the folder, I couldn't shake the chill that had settled deep inside me, because something about the way my mother's eyes softened told me she wasn't finished with the conversation. And a part of me, though I didn't want to admit it then, already knew exactly who they were saving their money for. After that conversation, I went back to my apartment, sat at my desk, and stared at my carefully stacked folder of plans. The rejection was still echoing in my mind, but what cut deeper was that I knew I should have expected it. It wasn't the first time my parents had dismissed me, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. To understand what happened next, you need to know a little bit about my family and the way the balance of attention had always tilted. I was the older child, the one who did her homework without being asked, the one who cleaned her plate, the one who followed the rules. My parents never had to worry about me. If anything, I think they counted on my reliability as a kind of invisible safety net, the assurance that no matter how chaotic things got with my sister, at least I wouldn't add to the storm. My sister, on the other hand, she was the storm. She was younger by 3 years, and from the moment she could talk, she knew how to command a room. She was charming, magnetic, and utterly reckless. She could talk herself into or out of anything. If she forgot her homework, she had an excuse ready. If she got in trouble at school, she spun it into a story that made her look like a victim or a hero. It was frustrating, watching her mistakes not only be forgiven but often praised. If she crashed her bike, she was adventurous. If she failed a test, she was creative, not academic. If she quit another job, it was because she was too independent to settle. Meanwhile, I was simply dependable, quiet, unnoticed. I tried not to resent it when I was younger. I told myself that being the responsible one was its own kind of reward. After all, teachers loved me. Employers trusted me. I could pay my bills on time and build a life without drama. But as the years went on, I realized that in my parents' eyes, responsibility wasn't exciting. It wasn't remarkable. It was just expected. When I began working on my business idea, I thought maybe, just maybe, this could be the thing that changed the dynamic. I wasn't asking them to rescue me. I wasn't asking for endless support the way my sister always did. I was showing them I had a concrete plan and asking them to take me seriously. But the truth was, deep down, I knew they had already chosen their favorite a long time ago. And my sister knew it too. She never hid her confidence in their loyalty. She would boast, half joking but half serious, "If I ever need something, Mom and Dad will take care of it." And time again, she was right. It wasn't just money. It was attention. When I got a promotion at work, my parents congratulated me politely, then moved on to asking my sister about her latest idea. When I invited them to see the small apartment I had worked hard to furnish, they nodded approvingly, then launched into praise for the vacation my sister was planning. A vacation she couldn't afford, but one they were subtly helping fund. I learned to swallow my pride and tell myself it didn't matter. But standing in the middle of that imbalance for years had worn me down in ways I didn't even realize until the business conversation brought it all into sharp focus. I wasn't just the child they overlooked. I was the child they assumed didn't need anything. And my sister? She was the one they believed in, even when there was no evidence to justify it. That was the normal world I lived in, a world where my hard work was invisible and her recklessness was glorified, a world where my parents' definition of support meant something very different, depending on which daughter was asking. So when they pushed that folder back across the table and told me no, I felt something inside me snap into clarity. I saw the truth for what it was. They hadn't even read my plan with the intention of considering it. Their minds had been made up from the start, and in the weeks that followed, their actions would prove it to me in a way I could never ignore again. Asterisk. It was only a few weeks later when the truth came out. The kind of truth that doesn't just sting but leaves a scar. I was visiting my parents one Sunday afternoon. My father was in his favorite chair, flipping through the newspaper, while my mother was bustling in the kitchen, humming softly. My sister breezed through the front door with the kind of energy that always announced her before her voice did. She was glowing, practically vibrating with excitement. "I have news," she declared, dropping her oversized purse on the couch. "Big news." I tried to smile, though I braced myself. My sister's big news often meant some impulsive decision that would later collapse in on itself. A new boyfriend, a trip she couldn't afford, another career shift. But this time, she said it with such pride that for a split second, I wondered if maybe she had actually done something stable for once. "I'm starting my own business," she announced, her eyes shining, and my father looked up from the paper, his face instantly lighting with pride. My mother came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, practically glowing. "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful," she said. I sat frozen in my chair. The words struck me like ice water. My business, my careful plan, my long hours of research and saving. Only weeks before, I had sat at this same table, folder in hand, asking for a fraction of the encouragement and faith they were pouring over her now. And they had dismissed me without a thought. "What kind of business?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She waved a manicured hand dismissively, as though the details didn't matter. "Oh, you know, a boutique. Something trendy. Clothes, accessories, maybe even some lifestyle stuff. I haven't decided exactly, but it's going to be amazing. People will love it." I swallowed hard. No plan, no numbers, no structure. Just an idea, flimsy, half-formed, yet suddenly treated as genius. And then came the blow that left me reeling. "We're helping her get started," my father said proudly, folding his newspaper. "It's important to support her while she gets this off the ground. Young people need encouragement, you know." My mother nodded eagerly. "We've already set aside some money to invest in her. We want her to have the best chance." The words rang in my ears. Invest. Set aside money. Just weeks before, they had looked me in the eye and told me they couldn't afford to throw money away. They had called my plan risky. They had made me feel small for even asking. Now, with my sister, their golden child, they weren't just willing, they were enthusiastic. I tried to keep my face neutral, but inside, my chest was burning. My mind screamed at the hypocrisy. She hadn't even presented a plan. She hadn't thought through costs, logistics, or competition. And yet, they didn't care. To them, her dream was worth their money. Mine wasn't even worth their attention. I remember forcing a smile and nodding as though I supported her. But inside, I felt something I had never allowed myself to feel before. Betrayal. It wasn't just that they favored her. I had always known that. It was the clarity of their choice. The line they had drawn in the sand without hesitation. In that moment, something inside me shifted permanently. I stopped believing they would ever see me as their equal. I stopped hoping for their approval. And quietly, deep in my chest, another resolve began to take shape. If they couldn't see my worth, I would prove it on my own. But what I didn't know then was just how poetic the universe's sense of justice could be. After that Sunday, it felt as though the air in my parents' house had shifted. Every visit, every phone call, every family dinner became another stage for my sister to parade her so-called business. In front of us all, she had never sounded so alive. She would sit at the dining table, her eyes gleaming as she rattled on about suppliers she hadn't secured, locations she hadn't confirmed, and marketing ideas that were more fantasy than strategy. Yet my parents listened with rapt attention, nodding, encouraging, even offering suggestions as though she were some brilliant visionary. And me? I was invisible whenever I tried to steer the conversation toward my own progress. The careful research I'd continued, the small side income I was already generating through my skills. My father would wave it off with a distracted, "That's nice, dear," before turning back to my sister. The difference was so stark it was almost comical. But instead of laughing, I felt myself retreating further and further inside, folding over the raw wound of betrayal like one might protect a bruise from another hit. It wasn't just their words. It was their actions. One afternoon, I came by to drop something off, and I noticed boxes piled high in the garage. Brightly colored packaging, sample products, glossy catalogs, all for my sister's boutique. My father was proudly helping her unload them from his truck, grinning ear to ear. The sight stopped me cold. Those boxes weren't just supplies. They were physical proof of the investment I had been denied. The truck rental, the merchandise, even the custom signage leaning against the wall. All of it had been paid for by my parents. Money they claimed they didn't have. Money they had told me was too precious to waste. My sister spotted me then, brushing her hair back with a smug little smile. "Oh, hey," she said casually. "Don't mind the mess. This is just what happens when you're really doing something big." Her words hit like a needle, sharp and deliberate. I forced a polite smile, but inside, my jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack. And it didn't stop there. Soon, my parents began comparing us openly. At dinner one evening, my mother leaned across the table and said, "You should really think bigger. Like your sister. She's not afraid to take risks." I swallowed hard, keeping my voice even. "I don't think caution is a flaw, Mom. It's why businesses actually last." But my father chuckled dismissively, patting my hand like I was a naive child. "Sometimes you have to gamble if you want to win. Look at your sister. She's got real spirit." The words sliced through me. They weren't just ignoring me anymore. They were belittling the very qualities that had always defined me: steadiness, discipline, foresight. And then came the part that truly tested my patience. One evening, my sister called me out of the blue. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the kind of tone she only used when she wanted something. "Hey," she said, "since you're good with, spreadsheets and numbers and stuff, could you help me set up my finances? Just, as a favor. I'm drowning in invoices, and you're so organized." I sat in silence for a moment, the audacity of it washing over me. She had mocked my business idea, flaunted my parents' investment in hers, and now she wanted my free labor to clean up her chaos. I told her gently but firmly that I was busy with my own work and couldn't commit. She laughed, a high, careless sound, and said, "Oh, come on. It's not like your little side thing takes up that much time." That was when I felt the anger crystallize into something sharper, because it wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was mockery. It was dismissal. It was them, my parents and my sister, building a pedestal for her, while expecting me to hold it steady from below. And I knew then that this wasn't just going to get worse. It was going to get unbearable. The tension had been building for months, pressing down on me like an iron weight. I had learned to keep my expression neutral whenever my sister flaunted her success, and I had trained myself to nod politely when my parents sang her praises. But inside, the pressure was unbearable, like steam locked inside a kettle. The breaking point came during what was supposed to be a simple family dinner. We were all gathered around the table. The air smelled of roasted chicken and garlic bread. But for me, every bite tasted like cardboard. My sister had once again taken over the conversation, painting grand pictures of her future. She spoke about expanding into multiple locations, about being the next big thing. My parents hung on every word as if she were revealing secrets from the heavens themselves. I sat quietly, sipping water, reminding myself to breathe. Then she turned to me with that same sly smile I had come to dread. "So," she said loudly, her voice dripping with condescension, "how's your little project going? Still just tinkering with it?" The word tinkering hung in the air like smoke. I felt my stomach twist. But before I could even form a response, my mother chuckled lightly and added, "She means well. But you know, honey, not everyone is cut out to run a business. Maybe it's best you keep it small." My father nodded, as though this were some undeniable truth of the world. "It's good you've got your job to fall back on. Not everyone is meant to be an entrepreneur." The room tilted. For a moment, all I could hear was the thudding of my own pulse in my ears. I had spent months pouring myself into my business, long nights after work, weekends filled with research, and every spare dollar carefully invested in tools and resources. I had built something slowly but surely, with real customers and real potential. And yet, here they were, reducing it to a little project. My sister leaned back in her chair, smirking, her wine glass raised in triumph. "See, that's why I'm the one carrying the family torch. I'm not afraid to dream big." A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. I clenched my hands in my lap, forcing myself to keep my expression calm. But inside, something snapped. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was clarity. I realized, in that moment, that I was never going to win their approval. They weren't capable of seeing me for who I was. They had already written the story in their minds. My sister, the bold visionary, and me, the cautious footnote. But what they didn't know, what none of them realized, was that caution was not weakness. Caution was strategy. Discipline was strength. Planning was power. As my sister laughed and toasted to her own brilliance, I felt a quiet resolve settle over me like steel. That was the last night I let their words pierce me. That was the night I stopped waiting for recognition. I didn't need their validation. What I needed was proof. Real, undeniable proof that the path I had chosen was not only valid but stronger, smarter, and destined to outlast the hollow pedestal they had built for her. And from that moment on, I knew I was going to win. Not with their help, not with their encouragement, but in spite of them. That dinner wasn't just a humiliation. It was a line in the sand, the last straw. The moment I stopped being the overlooked daughter and began becoming the woman who would outlast them all. After that dinner, I went home in silence. I didn't bother arguing with them. I didn't raise my voice or defend myself. What would have been the point? Their minds were set, their loyalties carved in stone. Instead, I sat down at my desk, pulled out the same folder they had pushed back toward me months earlier, and opened it again. The pages had grown worn from being handled so often, but to me, they were more alive than ever. My sister had her parents' money, but I had something she didn't even understand, a foundation built on discipline and clarity. That night, I made a decision. If they weren't going to back me, I would back myself. I would bootstrap every dollar, every ounce of energy, every skill I had until my business was strong enough to stand without them. And I had a unique weapon on my side. Though at the time, I didn't fully appreciate just how powerful it would become. My weapon wasn't money. It wasn't flashy branding or expensive advertising. It was knowledge. Over the years, I had taught myself skills most people paid others to handle. I knew how to build a simple website, how to run low-cost targeted ads online, how to negotiate with suppliers, and how to manage my own books with ruthless efficiency. I didn't need an investor to hire experts. I had already become my own. Every night after work, I poured myself into my project. I built my website piece by piece. I designed the logo myself, staying up until 2 in the morning to get the details just right. I reached out to potential customers directly, building relationships instead of relying on empty buzz. And slowly, quietly, sales began to trickle in. It wasn't glamorous. There were no grand opening parties, no glossy catalogs, no social media photo shoots with champagne glasses raised in celebration. My business started humbly, almost invisibly, but every sale I made was real. Every customer I earned came back because they trusted me, not because of a flashy ad campaign. Meanwhile, I watched from the sidelines as my sister's boutique launched with glitter and noise. My parents bragged about it to anyone who would listen. There were balloons at the storefront, catered hors d'oeuvres, and speeches about future success. People clapped, photos were taken, and for a moment, it looked like she had everything I didn't. But beneath the sparkle, I could see the cracks forming. Her prices were too high. Her inventory was scattered and inconsistent. She didn't track her expenses, didn't understand supply chains, and most importantly, she didn't listen to her customers. I said nothing. I offered no advice. When she hinted at needing help with her books or begged me to teach her how to do the boring stuff, I smiled politely and told her I was busy because the truth was, I was busy building something solid while she burned through money like dry leaves in a fire. And deep down, I knew patience would be my greatest ally. I didn't need to destroy her business. She was going to do that all on her own. All I had to do was keep building mine in silence, brick by brick, until the moment came when the contrast would be undeniable. That was the heart of my plan. Not revenge in the loud, dramatic sense, but victory by competence. Letting her arrogance dig her grave while I climbed, step by careful step, toward something lasting. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic. But it was powerful, and soon enough, the results would speak for themselves. Louder than any speech, louder than any toast, louder than the false applause of her grand opening. Because while she wasted what she had been given, I was proving that real success couldn't be bought. It had to be earned. The months that followed felt like living two completely different lives side by side. On one hand, there was my sister, whose business was a constant performance. Every week she had a new exciting announcement splashed across her social media. Flash sales, influencer shoutouts she had paid for, new product lines she barely understood, all wrapped up in glitter and hype. My parents shared every post, proudly telling neighbors and friends that their youngest was on the verge of something big. On the other hand, there was me. My business didn't look glamorous from the outside. I didn't host launch parties or spend thousands on polished marketing. My growth was quieter, but it was steady. One customer at a time, one good review after another, one product improvement with each cycle. While my sister was chasing attention, I was chasing loyalty, and I was winning it. I remember one evening, sitting at my desk with a cup of tea, refreshing my website analytics. The numbers weren't explosive, but they were consistent. Orders had doubled in the last month, and most of them were repeat customers. That meant more than any flashy milestone. It meant I had created something people trusted enough to return to. Meanwhile, cracks in my sister's empire were becoming impossible to ignore. Her boutique had been open just 6 months when the first problems surfaced. Customers complained about late shipments and poor quality. She had ordered trendy items in bulk without checking suppliers, and when things arrived, they weren't what was promised. Instead of fixing the issues, she brushed them off. "People are too picky," she told me one afternoon with a dismissive wave of her hand. But word spreads quickly. Negative reviews started stacking up online. Her sales slowed. The showroom that had once been filled with bright lights and eager shoppers now sat empty more often than not. And the expenses. Oh, the expenses. She had burned through most of the money my parents had given her on things that looked impressive, but produced nothing. Glossy advertisements in magazines no one read. A brand photographer for pictures that made her store look like a fashion spread. Decorations that cost more than some people's rent. One evening, she called me again. Her voice was strained, tight. "Hey, can you maybe help me with my numbers? I think I messed up a little. I just need you to look over everything and tell me where I went wrong." I stared at the phone, her words buzzing in my ear. For a moment, I almost laughed. Where she went wrong? The list was endless. But what struck me most was the arrogance of it. As if she had the right to demand my labor when she had mocked my own efforts and belittled my progress. "I'm really sorry," I said gently, "but I don't have the bandwidth. My own business is keeping me busy." Asterisk. The silence on the other end told me everything. She wasn't used to hearing no. And while she struggled, I thrived. I began attending local networking events. Not the glamorous kind, but the practical ones. Small business meetups where we shared resources and strategies. I picked up invaluable tips about scaling, about leveraging affordable marketing, about building systems that could grow with me. I didn't need millions. I just needed to be smart. Within a year, my little business that my family had dismissed as tinkering was generating consistent income. Enough that I could reduce my hours at my day job. Enough that I could start considering expansion. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. My sister's boutique, once the golden child of the family's conversations, was bleeding money. Every time we sat at the dinner table, the energy shifted. My parents still tried to keep their voices bright, but their eyes gave them away. Tired, worried, defensive. My sister tried to bluff her way through, talking about long-term vision, but even she couldn't hide the panic creeping in. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth was revealing itself without my help, and in the quiet of my own home. Watching orders roll in, I felt a calm, quiet satisfaction. This was the moment I had been working toward. Not a single triumphant scene where I stood up and shouted, but a slow, deliberate unveiling of the truth. That real success cannot be handed to you. It must be built, day by day, brick by careful brick. And while my sister's tower of glass shattered around her, mine was becoming unshakable stone. Asterisk, it didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about failure. It rarely explodes. It crumbles, piece by piece, until there's nothing left to hold it together. For months, I had been watching quietly as my sister's boutique unraveled. At first, it was the bad reviews, 1-star ratings describing poor quality, delays, unanswered emails. Then came the empty store, the hours where she sat behind the counter scrolling on her phone while no one walked in. My parents kept trying to paint over the cracks, insisting she just needed time and support. But the numbers didn't lie, and eventually, even they couldn't ignore them. One Saturday evening, I stopped by my parents' house for dinner. When I walked in, the atmosphere was heavy, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the tension. My mother's smile was tight, brittle. My father's face was pale, his jaw clenched. My sister was already there, slouched on the couch, mascara smudged beneath her eyes. The moment I stepped in, she shot me a look, half defensive, half desperate. Then, my father spoke. His voice was low, weary. "Your sister needs more money." The words landed like a dull thud. I glanced at her, then back at him. "More money? She just needs a little help to get through this rough patch," my mother interjected quickly, her hands twisting in her lap. "You know how hard it is to start a business. She just needs another boost to stabilize." I could feel it then, the weight of expectation settling onto me. For the first time, they weren't just asking each other to bail her out. They were looking at me. "Maybe you could give her some advice," my father said carefully, though his eyes told me what he really meant. "Or maybe invest a little. You've been doing well with your side project, haven't you?" The irony was almost too much to bear. I sat down slowly, my hands folded neatly in my lap, and looked at each of them in turn. "When I asked for your support," I began, keeping my voice calm and steady, "you told me you couldn't afford to throw money away. You told me it was too risky." My mother's lips parted, but I didn't give her the chance to interrupt. "But when she came with nothing more than a vague idea, you opened your wallets without hesitation. You invested in glitter and promises, and now you're surprised that it's falling apart." My sister bristled, her voice sharp. "It's not my fault. The market is tough right now. People don't understand my vision." I turned to her, my expression unflinching. "No, it's not the market. It's the way you ran it. You thought success was about appearances, about who clapped the loudest at your launch party. But success is about consistency, about responsibility, about building something people can trust. And you never understood that." Her face flushed crimson. For once, she didn't have a quick retort. My father shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the floor. My mother looked at me as though seeing me clearly for the first time. "You've been doing well?" she asked quietly, her voice almost trembling. I nodded. "Yes, my business is growing. Slowly, but steadily. I don't need more money because I've built it on a foundation that lasts." The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. My sister's lips trembled as she tried to hold back tears. My parents sat in stunned quiet, their carefully constructed illusion collapsing before their eyes. And in that moment, I realized the true power of patience. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to gloat. The contrast between us spoke louder than anything I could have said. Their golden child had squandered everything, and the daughter they had dismissed, overlooked, underestimated, she was the one who had built something real. The look on their faces, shock, guilt, dawning realization, was more satisfying than any applause, more vindicating than any investment. They knew, without me having to say it outright, they had chosen wrong. Not long after that dinner, the collapse became official. My sister's boutique, the grand project my parents had once paraded around as proof of their golden child's brilliance, shut its doors for good. It didn't happen quietly. There was no graceful exit, no neat little announcement about pivoting to new opportunities. It was messy, bitter. Customers went public with their complaints. Angry posts flooded her social media. Local blogs that had once featured her store as the next big thing now reported on its sudden closure with headlines that stung like salt in a wound. The debts piled high. Suppliers wanted their payments. The lease on the boutique space went unpaid. And with every phone call and every bill that arrived, Her carefully crafted image crumbled. My parents tried, at first, to cushion the blow. They begged her to be patient, to keep trying, to find a way. But money doesn't bend to hope. Eventually, even they couldn't deny the reality. It was over. The day the boutique officially closed. I happened to be at a local market where I was selling some of my own products. It was nothing extravagant, just a booth I'd set up among other small vendors. My table was simple but neat, items arranged with care. A small sign with my brand name, a stack of business cards, and a little notebook full of handwritten thank you notes I'd included in past orders. A woman approached me, browsing with interest. As she picked up one of my items, she smiled warmly. "You know," she said, "I used to shop at that boutique downtown. It was such a disappointment, but then I found your work online, and it's night and day. The quality here is real. You actually care about your customers." Her words stopped me, not because they were unusual. By then, I had grown used to hearing kind feedback, but because of the timing. At that very moment, across town, my sister's boutique was being stripped of its fixtures and signage, reduced to nothing more than an empty shell. And here I was, standing in front of customers who were praising the very qualities she had mocked me for. Consistency, reliability, attention to detail. I thanked the woman, a quiet smile tugging at my lips. Inside, the satisfaction was sharp and undeniable. Later that evening, my parents came to the market. They hadn't visited before. They had always been too busy, or perhaps too disinterested. But that day, they walked through the rows of vendors until they found me. I'll never forget the look on their faces as they took in my booth. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Customers were lined up, chatting with me, handing me cash, thanking me for my work. My parents stood there silently, watching as I handled each interaction with care. When the last customer walked away, my father cleared his throat. "You've done well," he said softly, almost as though admitting a secret. My mother nodded beside him, her eyes wet with unspoken guilt. I looked at them both, my expression calm. "I told you it could work," I said simply. There was no need for anger anymore. The victory was already mine, written not in words but in actions, in results. In undeniable contrast, my sister had laughed at me once, calling my business a little project. Now, her grand boutique lay in ruins, while my project had grown into something steady, thriving, and admired. That moment, standing at my booth, with customers praising me and my parents finally forced to see the truth, was the single most impactful victory of my life. Not because I had beaten her, but because I had proven to myself and to them that justice comes not from luck or favoritism, but from patience, persistence, and integrity. Asterisk. In the months that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. My sister, once the center of attention, moved back into my parents' home. The boutique had left her in debt and in shame, her confidence shattered. She rarely spoke about it, and when she did, her voice carried a bitterness that filled the room like smoke. My parents, for their part, became quieter. The boasting stopped. The endless comparisons that had once stung me so deeply were replaced by silence, and sometimes by hesitant questions about my work. They were careful now, almost cautious, as though afraid I might push them away. But I didn't need their validation anymore. By then, my business had grown strong enough to sustain itself. What started as a few late nights at my desk had become a steady source of income, with customers who trusted me and returned again and again. I had expanded little by little, never faster than I could manage, always mindful of the foundation I was building, and it was paying off. I moved into a better apartment, one I furnished not with hand-me-downs but with things I had chosen and paid for myself. I no longer lay awake at night worrying about bills or whether my hard work would amount to anything. I knew now, with certainty, that I had built something real. As for my relationship with my parents, it never returned to what it had been. Some wounds don't fully heal. I could forgive them, in time, but the trust, that blind hope that they would one day see me clearly, was gone. And maybe that was for the best, because I no longer needed to be seen by them to know my worth. The irony, of course, was not lost on me. The very qualities they once dismissed in me, caution, discipline, patience, had been the keys to my success. And the very traits they celebrated in my sister, recklessness, charm, bravado, had been the seeds of her downfall. Justice had played out exactly as it should. Looking back now, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel clarity. I see the lesson written in bold across those years of struggle, that favoritism and handouts can never replace hard work and persistence. That the truth, no matter how long it takes, always rises to the surface, and that sometimes the sweetest victories are not the ones you announce loudly, but the ones you live quietly, every single day. Because in the end, my sister's boutique was nothing more than a chapter, but my business, my life, my hard-won independence, that became the story I carried forward. One of betrayal turned into justice, invisibility turned into strength, and patience rewarded with the kind of victory no one could take away. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.